Welcome to this week's episode of Leadership Soundbites with Rocco and Michelle and our special guest mentor, coach, and teacher, Margie Hagene. Thank you. So we're launching on part of the episode of Lessons in Leadership. Margie has got such a career from teaching, right, to working at Ford, to developing Rocco and I around A3 thinking and facilitating and engaging with leaders and coaching, as well as every other freaking leader that she engaged with around the same thing. And I mean, I'm going to speak for Rocco too, are just excited to be in the room with you again. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So we're going to kick us off with a quote. And as we were talking around what are some nuggets and lessons in leadership, we rounded back on a quote that I've heard a million times. And I don't know that I'm exaggerating, but it really kicks us off on the right direction. And it's from the perspective of a leader within Toyota organizations developing others. It aligns with other stuff that Margie will let us know about. But the quote is this: until I heard where your thinking was at, I didn't know what question you needed. And so when I think about that, and it's like I said, I've heard it so many times, it's a matter of we don't need to come fully loaded with what we believe someone needs to hear or the question they need to hear, the direction we need to go. We don't need to overplan. All we have to do literally is sit in it, listen to what people are thinking, what their thinking is at, and believe it or not, the right question or comment will come. And we've learned that lesson a few times, Rocco, haven't we? But that to me is the powerful one, is that you can help unlock people simply by understanding first where their thinking's at and not prescribe it to them. So Margie, thank you. And I know you've got some other connections around that particular quote or mindset. What's on your mind?
It's on my mind when you say the quote, I didn't know what question you needed until I heard where your thinking was at. I immediately go to one of the most important teachers in my life, who is John Shook. And I met John during my last 5 of 17 years when I worked at Ford Motor Company. And meeting John took me full circle to when I decided to major in education. And more specifically, I majored in early childhood education. And what drew me to early childhood was the genuine curiosity and joy with which young kids learn. They learn by doing, they learn by exploring. For the most part, there are outliers, but they have willingness to try again if it didn't go the way they wanted to. And they love doing it over and over and over again if it's something they have mastered. And they are drawn to doing something again because they've learned how to do it and now they want to master it. And they ask incredible questions that stump adults. And that is one of the things, if I connect it now back to Shook and the practice of improvement, which by the way, in the College of Education is called improvement science. It's actually a science of improving. It is about learning things firsthand, rolling up your sleeves and trying it for yourself. If it doesn't go as expected, trying it again a little differently, feeling a great sense of satisfaction when it has gone as you'd hoped, and you repeat it again and again for different reasons. You may repeat it again and again, and it is best supported by the asking of questions, both by the people who are trying to learn it and by the people who are supporting others trying to learn what it is that they need to learn for themselves. So I I think regardless of where I find myself doing my work, I have the mindset, deep practices and muscle memory for showing up as a teacher and a coach. And my observation is really exceptional leaders do that when they show up for their work as well.
Oh my God, my brain is just overload right now because you gave us so many nuggets just in that brief introduction, Margie. So my first thing is when you talked about young children and wanting to focus there because of their willingness to do and explore. And my mind immediately went, I definitely learned that from you. And as I coach and teach in healthcare, what I'm learning is that as adults, people have had experiences that squashed that early learning capability or excitement where they want to do and explore. And I would love to hear your perspective on how you coach individual adults or teams in how to let go of that fear or being willing to go back and have that willingness to explore and do again.
So I'm going to show up as a teacher and coach right now in this moment and ask you and Michelle, what was your experience of how I did that with you?
Questions. You asked questions of us constantly, because it was that practice and of actually exploring and being willing to share your thoughts without negative repercussions. I always felt safe, and I always felt like you truly wanted to hear my thinking, that there wasn't a hidden agenda behind the question. So I think it was that practice of just showing up with curiosity to and creating the condition for me to learn.
It is, I'm going to say yes and, right? Because the other part of it that comes to mind, because I watched you do it more recently in a group that you'd worked with, is for people to start observing, you know, and it can be reflecting back or observing on a go forward when certain behaviors or barriers show up, paying attention to what those triggers are. To what happened. So the questions are nuanced into different questions of, you know, when have you noticed this, or what is your thinking, or where did you feel, or what did you know, so that there is this, you develop an awareness so that they can start, I'm going to say, taking control of reactions and thoughts and feelings that they may have in the moment. But yeah, it is through questions that support the thinking and moving forward.
Yeah, and I think the questions also, to my way of thinking, it helps people, whether they're 5 years old or 65 years old, to have practice learning to own the thinking for themselves. And sometimes to do that, you need simple structures for the practice of whatever it is you're trying. I didn't realize until I met Shook and had firsthand, side-by-side work with him about the scientific method of plan, do, study, adjust, or plan, do, check, adjust, that I was actually doing that in classrooms in early childhood education. So if you spend any time in that sort of a setting, the day has a rhythm to it, and at different parts of the day, there are different little learning stations set up for kids to walk up to, and for the most part, be pretty self-directed about how they navigate their way through that. And what you do in a classroom, if you're the teacher of that, is you're constantly, I didn't know it was called rounding, but what I was doing was rounding, going from learning station to learning station, seeing how kids were using it, how they were going about it, who might be stuck, who wanted to talk about what they were doing. And what I often did was ask a series of PDSA questions. So how did you choose this spot? So what's one thing you did with it? What happened when you did that? What else did you try? What made you change to that way of doing it? What else are you thinking of doing with it? So it was PDSA questions, no differently than when I was walking on the plant. The manufacturing floor was shook at Ford when we'd walk up to a workstation and do a sequence of questions based on where their thinking was at, and offer another question that helped them have more considerations for the work that was in front of them. So whether it's a workstation in manufacturing or an imaging unit in healthcare or a activity table in a preschool, that's their work. Whatever they're involved in the moment is their work, and setting the conditions for them to think more deeply and accomplish whatever it is that they determine is important to accomplish there is supported by good questioning.
It's interesting, Margie, when you talk about because Rocco went back to early childhood stuff, and so I was just in San Diego this past weekend with my grandkids, and the youngest one just turned 4. And I literally have images in my mind as you were talking through all that stuff in those stations, because he is into anything to do with dirt and heavy equipment and firefighting and hoses and all that stuff. And so his other grandparents brought him to a fire station to visit, and he was like over the moon. At 4 years old, kneeling down and going, how many gallons does that hold? How many hoses do you have? How many? Literally question after question after question. When we went to a soccer match of his older brother, he was there he had 2 small little pieces of equipment, that toys that he brought, like an excavator and something else, because he knows the names of all these things. And then he decided he was going to be a human excavator. So he would come over to me and go, okay, Grammy, I'm going to be an excavator now. Okay, great. And so he'd come over, see, now I'm going to smash it down like this. Look what happened. Yeah, all that stuff, claws, I'm a crane now, I'm a whatever. And so these images flashed in my mind when you're talking, because he's going through his own PDSA cycles on how did that work? What adjustments do I make next? And to Rocco's point, if we can get ourselves, and I'm not going to put this on other people, to where we can get out of our own way, right? And go back to that exploration, curiosity, let's experiment. We don't have a fear of failure, rejection, all shame, guilt, all that stuff. You can make life more fun again. I think when we can get rid of all those constraints that literally I think we put on ourselves, it's powerful, because he didn't care about anybody looking at him. The fact that his hands were dirty, that he was a loader at one point, moving everything out of the way with his hands. I mean, it's the coolest thing. So that's where my brain went when you were talking. It's like, God, to get back to that point again. I mean, it's powerful stuff.
It is. It is. And there are times when, whether it's a 5-year-old or a 65-year-old, where the learning is completely self-directed and reinforcing, and just a joy for them.
Mhm.
And there are times when a learner of any age gets a bit stuck or tripped up. And that's when well-considered questions are as important as when someone is kind of in sponge mode, just can't get enough of it. And I think some of my best teachers around that, before I went to university, I went to community college for 2 years, which is much more life experiential and hands-on. And even in that, it was associate degree program in early childhood. And I had 2 women who were older than I am now, probably, when they were teaching me. Their names were Gretchen Flood and Dee Peck.
Oh,
And as part of the curriculum in this program, it included them doing a lot of hands-on observations of me and side-by-side in the moment coaching. And I know each of you has heard this story before, but perhaps it will be useful to others. My job to create the conditions for learning was, without exception, to ask an open-ended question. So once a week, either Dee or Gretchen would come to whatever program I was assigned to. And I had some practice that I was supposed to do. And regardless of the teaching practice, it 100% always included how I asked questions. So they would come into a room while I was in partnership with the lead teacher, and typically sitting in a circle on the floor. And they would sit just outside of my peripheral vision. And when I asked a question of the kids that was not open-ended in nature, either Dee or Gretchen would lean into my peripheral vision, and that was my signal that I needed to try again, because I hadn't done it the way it was supposed to be done. I hadn't asked an open-ended question. So I would say the first time they came and observed me, they were like bobbleheads. They were bobbing in and out constantly, just the way it is with grown-ups in work settings. Our usual way to ask questions is not open-ended. It's not open-ended at all. So I had high expectations of myself, and I was really pissed at the end of the session for how often they had to bob in and out. And so they came on successive weeks. And I will say that by the end of about 30 days, I was 95% of the time asking open-ended questions, because I was very determined and intentional that if that's the way I was supposed to show up, by God, I'm showing up that way. So it sticks with me to this day about the importance and power of a practice, the partner or coach or someone who can give you immediate, useful feedback about something you are intending to be better at and you're still tripping on. One of the things that I will forever need help getting better at is not interrupting, which means the practice of pausing. And so to that, I look to another of my most treasured teachers and mentors, Judy Brown, who she's another one I had the privilege of meeting and working with at Ford. She was an outside person coming in to do work at Ford, and I had the benefit of being partnered with her. And she was masterful at asking questions and guiding important conversations and creating conditions for learning. And I was seated next to her one time, and if anyone is around me, they will see that I have to sit on my hands and I bob a little when I really feel like I have to have something to say. And one time, Judy quietly put her hand on my shoulder and whispered to me, Margie, getting ready to talk is not the same thing as listening. So there's the offering of questions, and there's the power and importance of just saying nothing so that another can continue to think and sort things out for themselves. And so again, all of this connects together. So whether it's a 5-year-old who has fascinated me, or Deepak or Gretchen Flood or Judy Brown or John Shook, it's observing, noticing, offering questions based on what you're seeing or hearing, recognizing the importance of the pause and being silent, giving the space. And all of it is about helping others own things for themselves and get better at things for themselves with intention.
I'm so glad you brought this topic up around the pause, the observation, the well-considered questions, and that getting ready to talk is not listening. Because that was the biggest learning that I had when Michelle and I were being mentored to you. I was always locked and loaded and had rapid fire questions to go. And I still to this day talk about the hand for Margie. You would give me the hand, like, okay, one question, and then pause and let them answer. And really, I mean, it was so transformative to me because I learned the meaning of what you say, well-considered question. When I was in that space of rapid fire questioning, I was validating my thinking. And what I realized is I'm showing up in the wrong way. I'm not there. If my role is a leader or as a coach or a teacher, I'm not there to validate my thinking. My role is to understand the thinking of the person I'm interacting with. And I can't do that if I'm showing up with this mindset and offering these questions. So when you taught us, and it really sunk in what a well-considered question means and all the things leading up to that to me is what transformed how I show up, my whole thought process, everything. And I can't say I'm not perfect. I still do rapid fire sometimes. But at least I'm aware of when I'm doing it and I try and stop myself. But it is something that, as I coach leaders now, it is something that I hear more often, along with those close-ended questions. That's what I hear a lot in leadership. We ask a lot of close-ended questions, and people are so conditioned that they don't even hear the close-ended question. They will just give this long-winded answer, even though technically it was a yes or no question. And so that's one of the things that I see a lot of in the healthcare space. There's a lot of close-ended questions, but thank you for bringing that up.
It's interesting you say that, because what came to mind for me was the comment that you made, Rocco, is that these closed-ended questions are literally validations of our own thinking, right? And so if you think about that, and I hadn't really connected that before, people aren't just responding with a yes or no because they're going into this defensive mode. You've thrown your thinking out there with a closed-ended question. They're not just going to go yes or no. They're going to give a yes or no with the reason and justification behind whatever that yes or no is. Because you didn't come with a well-considered open-ended question. You lobbed your thinking out there, not you, but everyone. But it's interesting because when you do come with a well-considered, open-ended question and you're truly there to understand their thinking, people don't need to go in defensive mode. There's no need to justify or defend my position in it because you're not coming with yours.
Mhm.
And the
Yeah.
connection to leadership on this is the higher I am in the organization, the higher my box is on the org chart, the less likely I am to have someone give an alternative thought or an alternative perspective if I've had offered a question that was my idea, question mark,
Yeah.
which shuts down thinking and improving it. And it doesn't come from a more, I hold the perspective that those questions don't come from a place of bad intent. They come from years and years of practice, and also the reward system in organizations rewards people for what they know and what they can show they did themselves. So we are offering a different way to think about things and a different way to practice, often in work systems where the recognition and reward system doesn't align with that, which makes it sometimes that much harder for starting to show up this way to get some traction and be appreciated.
No,
Margie,
I totally agree.
can I know I can ask a question.
Yes.
I'm really curious because as you were saying that, I was thinking about some meetings that I had today, and I was thinking, ooh, I could have showed up a little bit differently. I could have asked. So you mentioned, you had a partner or a coach to help those two women that helped you learn how to ask those open-ended questions, and they would lean in. And your purpose was to ask 100% open-ended questions. What is your perspective from a leader around that? So like when you're building, sometimes when I'm teaching, I'll say, well, when you're learning a new skill, you want to have an imbalance towards that new skill. And so you might have to do that more than in others. And there might always be a circumstance that we can think of where you might ask a closed-ended question, but have an imbalance toward that. What is your perspective on asking open-ended questions, well-considered questions as a leader versus those closed-ended questions? And I don't know if I'm phrasing that exactly right. As I'm hearing myself say it, I don't know that it's hitting or landing the way I want it to.
Well, let's find out. Margie, what are your thoughts?
Try it again.
Okay.
Which question do you want to offer me?
I don't know that we have enough time today for me to formulate it. Yeah,
Just one question.
So, Rocco, what I would say is this is how you were just thinking aloud is an example of how we often ask questions in the workplace. We have something on our mind, so we start to talk about it, and somewhere in there might be a question. And if I'm a leader and I've offered a question with that many words around it, I start to get nervous because I'm not sure if I'm answering what it is you were intending me to reply to respond. So with that as a little mini teach in the moment, what's the question you want to offer me?
It's a close. Those are all closed-ended questions, because what I'm getting at is.
So say the closed-ended question, and I will help with modeling how it could be shifted to open.
Okay. Let's do that then. Okay, so do I always need to show up with 100% open-ended questions.
How important is it to show up with open-ended questions 100% of the time?
Very important.
Well, that's how I shifted it.
That's the question.
So you said, do I always need to show up 100% of the time with yes or with an open-ended question? I could reply to that as with yes or no. When I offer a question that typically starts with what or how, how important is it to always show up with an open-ended question 100% of the time? It requires me to offer a bit of my thinking, which is not the same as replying yes or no. Yeah. I will back into this. There are certainly circumstances when a yes/no question is not at all appropriate, and in fact could potentially cause harm, and that has to do with things around safety or things of that nature. When my granddaughter is about to step into the street and I see a car coming, that's not when I look at her and say, Reese, what will happen if you walk into the street right now? I pull her out of the street and say, stop, don't cross. I'm being really directive. Afterwards, I might say, hey, there was a car coming. What should you have done before stepping into the street? So the same thing, if I'm in staying with healthcare, given that's your industry, if I'm in an emergency department or something is going on, it's not when I look at a clinician and say, you know, what will happen if you do that step in triage? It's like, do this, yes, no, yes, no. When those are moments that are important for a quick, repeatable, often standard response. I don't know what the research, I don't know what the research might be on this, but 85% of the time, my experience over decades of working with people in complex systems, 80 or 85% of the time, we likely do not have to ask a yes/no question. And 90% of the time, we do. We have deep habit for asking yes, no, or lead the witness. Don't you think we should blah, 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 blah? My idea, question mark. We get better thinking, we get better consideration, we get better involvement, we get better leadership. When we pause and think for just 3 or 4 seconds to ask a question that results in better thinking and conditions for better work and better outcomes when it's open-ended.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Did you have okay. I'm sitting here smiling as you're talking through that, because it takes me back 8 years, 9 years, whenever that was before.
Way back.
Yeah, way back in time, the time machine. But the other thing, because it was in the early 1840s.
Yeah.
We were gathered around the fire. But it's and this was not during the Indian attack, because then it was very directive. Okay. But it's funny, because what's bringing to mind for me when you're saying all that stuff is that as we're doing deep practice and asking well-considered questions, there's going to be longer pauses, because we are filtering through. And so most people are not going to know, but you in the room will know Rolodex, right? So I'm literally flipping through a Rolodex in my brain going, yeah, not that one, not that one, not that one, not that one, as far as questions go. But it's that if people get, and my observation, and I've sensed it too until I've gotten better at just counting, uncomfortable in the pause or the silence, if you will, because they have this expectation, this narrative running in their heads that they're done talking. Now I've got to jump in with whatever my brilliant thought is, whatever that may be. And I think that's the other piece too, is for people to get comfortable with not giving themselves permission to ask a close-ended question, especially when we're practicing, and then comfortable in the silence and the pause. Because I've checked myself. I know in coaching things, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna be very directive, or it's a close-ended question. I'm like, you know what? No, it's not. I'm gonna think a little bit more, and I'm gonna offer you up a question of how I'm trying to coach you to do. But it does take a little bit more thought at times, because it's easier to go the path that even now, after all these years of practice, is still a well-traveled road.
You know, and well-considered questions are not complicated.
No.
Over time, I've learned that a well-considered question that creates the space for someone else to think usually are like 7 to 10 words most. If I'm listening to where your thinking is at, I hear something that you said, and what I offer back is, say more about that. So when did that start happening? What's it like for you in that moment? What else is on your mind about this? Who have you spoken to so far? Who else is it really important to talk to? Where have you observed it firsthand? What's your plan for going about that? What is making you feel uneasy about this? I spend time in a lot of different industries. I don't know anything. Well, I've learned some things. I've learned enough to be truly dangerous. If I were to try any of the roles that many people have in a lot of the industries that I've worked in, including healthcare. And I can sit and have a coaching conversation with anyone in any industry at any level. Because I'm listening to what they say, and I don't have to know. I don't have to. I don't feel the need to show that I know anything about what they're talking about. It's not mine to own. What I own in the moment is supporting them with thinking more deeply about whatever it is they're wrestling with.
You know, when you say that, it's like I keep having flashbacks of our mentor sessions.
Are they scary? Are they scary flashbacks?
They're good flashbacks. They're good flashbacks. And there were so many nuggets and things that we learned when you mentored Michelle and I. And, you know, I can see how they're now showing up with as I lead teams and lead others now. And I'm just so excited to hear them again, because I forget like the origin of it. But it's like everything that you just said just now, it's all about presence. And it's like going through professional coaching and getting our certification, Michelle and I doing that. And it taught, one of the core competencies is about presence and active listening. And it's like, oh my gosh, that is what Margie was teaching us in the moment of that A3 thinking. And even going back to the quote, I didn't know what question to ask until I heard what your thinking is at. It required presence. It required you to have an open mind and just listen to what someone was saying. What are they not saying? What are they saying? How are they saying it? What am I getting from this person? And how can I help this person move forward? And so I just get giddy every time we were in the room together, because it just surfaces all this learning. And I love being able to spread what we learn from you and the knowledge that you have with others, because it's just transformative.
It's so funny you say that. When I was thinking the distinction, because I wrote it down and we've said it a million times in the room, 6 to 10, 7 to 10, whatever it is, words are typically a really well-considered question. And what dawned on me is, I think the other stuff where they're longer and we're processing out loud or live streaming our thinking, is we're literally infusing our thinking into whatever this question is. And the simpler, well-considered questions, our thinking's not in it. And so I think that's the major distinction, is when we find ourselves to where you're putting a comma in the question and rounding it back and the semicolon enters, we're literally infusing our own thinking in what this is. And so just stop, start over, going, okay, what question do I have about their thinking? And not trying to pass on what my thinking is about what they just shared. But I think that's the major difference in that. And then ownership stays where it's supposed to be. And it doesn't shift over to me of this whatever problem or situation they're dealing with. Yeah.
I think it's
So.
also important to remember that there are times when, and I'm offering this from the perspective of a leader in a complex system, sometimes when I offer a question, the person receiving it may not have a thought about it right now. We have, deep neural pathways for QA, go. This is about showing up differently than that. And I may offer a question that is important and requires time to think. That made me be a moment when I say, Michelle, it's important enough that you have a thought about this, that I'm going to come back tomorrow and hear what one thought is that you have about it. It's important for your thinking to come from that question. Again, not everything is a 5-alarm fire. We're so wired for firefighting on everything as well in complex systems that there are moments when more time is needed, and be respectful enough to offer that, and responsible enough to follow up.
Yep. I love it.
Margie, Michelle, I got to ask one more question.
No, you're fine, Rocco. Go for it.
So again, because of our role, coaching and teaching in different organizations, when you're learning this new way of leading, it can be exhausting. What advice, based on your years of experience of working with leaders, can you offer to the listeners today?
I'm trying to distill down to well, wherever you are is where you are. I mean, you get some heightened awareness about what your own habits are, what your own practices are, what you have really deep neural pathways for how you respond to things about, and keep your practice field when you're starting, keep your practice field small. Maybe it's one person in a one-on-one that you choose to start showing up a little bit differently with, and you're transparent about it. It's respectful to be transparent. It's completely okay to say, I am learning that how leaders ask questions can make a difference in how others in the organization have a problem to think and do critical thinking. for themselves, and I want to be better at that. So today you may hear me ask questions in a way that I don't typically ask, and I may trip over them a bit. And so thank you for letting me try this with you. You had decades to learn how to show up this way, and to think it's going to be reversed just because you decide you want it to be reversed it's not the way it works.
We're kind of wired.
I want to have that one more cookie. Yeah. You know, it's hard work. It's hard work. It's important work, and it's hard work.
And I love the call out that literally start with a thin slice. Where are you starting so that you can get some practice, and you're not beating yourself up with failure at every turn, because it is exhausting. You know, think about being in a classroom and you're learning something new. You're more exhausted typically when you're in a classroom all day learning something new than going to work all day and maybe working even longer in a day than what you do sitting in a classroom, because you don't have those deep neural pathways built. So you're building new roads as you're learning new stuff. So yeah, I agree.
I would build on what you said, Michelle. One of the things I've neglected to say is that one of the things you're also taught in the College of Education is to catch kids doing something well. Because when someone notices that I've done something well, I am more likely to do that again. So to this notion of don't beat yourself up if you haven't nailed it. If it's a little bit better today than it was yesterday, yay me. It's lifelong practice. I still practice. I'm very wordy. There are still many times when I will say, let me start over. I am still an interrupter. There are many times when I still have to just go. It is lifelong practice. And my observation is if this is one of the things you decide to get better at, better, even strikingly better, is possible.
I agree. I agree. Thank you. I mean,
Thank you.
I have missed being in the room with you, even though I was blessed to be in the room with you. Just in this way, learning, understanding history, your thoughts on standout moments, and just, you know, as far as developing leaders and developing yourself along the way. Thank you. So as we close this out, what are one or two things, and the two things was because of Rocco, one or two things that you would love people to walk away with on this topic that we've chatted about today?
One or two things?
I know, right? It's hard.
Just to highlight.
Wait, I'm going to turn it back to you. What are your one or two things, Rocco?
True Margie style. True Margie style. You know, I'll start with, you know, go back to the beginning of the quote. I didn't know what question to ask until I heard where your thinking was at. It's the most powerful thing to show up with genuine curiosity about someone else's thinking other than your own, and asking a question that can help bring them forward, move them forward in their thinking. So that's one thing. The other thing is having that coach, partner, when you're building this new skill as a leader, having that coach or partner to help you observe you, give you feedback, celebrate with you, because we are our biggest critics, and having that person can help celebrate, but can also help show you what your practice is in the moment, and help you design what's next by asking questions about where you want to go next. So I think those would be the two.
Yeah, thank you. Margie.
No, Michelle.
Oh my God, woman. Yeah, it was so funny. The thing that came out in Rocco, it was based on what you just said around having someone there to give you real-time feedback. As humans, we are wired, our brain is wired to protect ourselves, right? And so I bring that up because someone asked me one time, they said, why do we always look at the negative? Why do people, we're wired for the most part to look at the negative. It's survival, right? It's survival brain is what goes on. And I think what happens is I was listening to you talk is if we don't have that other person in the room, we may walk away with this narrative going, it's complete failure. And the reality of it is the other person's going to say, you did this 4 times I just had a conversation with my daughter about, now mind you, she's 38, going to be 39 at the end of the month, around, when she was younger, baking and cooking and all that stuff, right? Because she'd call me at one point when she was in college going, how do you scramble eggs, Mom? And she has this narrative that she was a terrible cook. And I said, you baked all the time. No, Mom, I was terrible at baking. It was lousy. I said, what are you talking about? You know what she responded? There was that cheesecake that I made and I followed the recipe and it was terrible. And I said, okay, Sam, but what about everything else? She remembers nothing.
Yep.
So it is so important, I think, that you have that other person in the room with you, someone else paying attention, being transparent about what you're working on, because odds are, unless you got a tally sheet going, which Margie recommends, and even then maybe not, you're not going to highlight where you did it right. You're going to focus on all the things that you did wrong. And we're wired that way. So I think that's the thing for me is the importance of having that peer buddy through this learning process. So Margie.
Intention and a little bit better today than yesterday.
And today's not the only day.
It is not.
Until you're at the end of Margie coaching and teaching you, then that does not ring true anymore toward the end. Thank you. Until next time, and I hope to get you back again to pick your brain more so that other people can learn from Margie, like Rocco and I have had the benefit. So thank you. This has been Leadership Soundbites with Rocco, Michelle, and Margie, teacher and coach. Until next time, please like, share, subscribe, and thank you.
Thank you.